Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Bracha Kodesh. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into Ezekiel, the 38th chapter. As you can see in the subheading, Prophecy about Gog and Future Invasion of Israel. And pretty much Ezekiel, the 38th chapter, it's prophetic, and it's in a nutshell Ezekiel's prophesying about, well, in this time, modern day Russia coming against the land of Israel, okay, and also the U.S., but primarily Israel in this Third World War, okay. So that lets us know that as as these tensions unfold, eventually when World War III pops off, Russia, along with its other allies, all right, which includes Turkey and, the different various nations, even some of these African nations, are going to come against Israel in that war. Okay, now, for a good couple of chapters in here, the Lord has had Ezekiel prophesy concerning a lot of these events that are, more prophetic from his time. Okay. So, let's keep that in mind as we go through this chapter. And keep in mind, Ezekiel's still, he's still in Babylon at this time. All right, just to lay the context of the chapter. So this is Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 1. And the word of the Lord Yahweh came on to me, saying, Son of man. So if you noticed, in a lot of these chapters, it starts off with the prophet letting you know the word of the Lord came on to me, saying, right? And the Lord tells the prophets what to say. So that's how, and then it's written down, it's scribed down for our learning in this time. So that's how these prophets were, either by this way or by a vision or a dream. But this is mainly how they received information concerning what would happen in the future. They didn't just sit down under an oak tree one day and then just pulled it out of thin air and then decided to make things up. Okay, because only the Most High is the creator. So he, as the scriptures tell us, declares the end from the beginning. And if he declares the end from the beginning, it's similar to, like a content creator writing the story, of a book or a movie, the script for it. He writes the whole entire thing, and then he knows what's going to happen at the end because he wrote it. So he can then give somebody else the inside scoop and say, oh, yeah, by the way, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen, yada, yada, yada. Cool. So this is Ezekiel 38, verse 2. Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. So now we got to address and deal with Gog, / the land of Magog. So where is that, and who is that referring to? Now, I pulled up a couple of ancient maps here, which when we're dealing with Gog, it's talking about Russia. Okay, however, when you pull up these ancient maps, always keep in mind that they are, let me zoom out a little bit. They are an approximation, right? Because it's not easy to be able to pinpoint exactly where certain locations that were named or mentioned a very long time ago, exactly where they are. So you get at best approximations, okay, but that's still enough for us to work with for our purpose here. So when you look up some ancient maps of Magog, okay, because it says prophesy against Gog, right, but in the land of Magog. So when you look up that ancient maps of Magog, you can see here, right? This is an ancient map here. And you can see Magog is up here, which is modern day Russia. Okay, when you look up, here's a map right here that we can take a look at. You can see this whole red part here, which is Russian territory. It comes down all the way to south of Russia, right? Which is right here. Okay. Bordered on the east side by the Caspian Sea, and then you can see Turkey here on the bottom left. Okay, you can see Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Iran, and all of that good stuff, right? So if you look back at this map here, you can see Magog. If this is Turkey, okay, and right around here is where you have like Georgia and Azerbaijan and Armenia. Magog would be Russia, okay? And if you also look in another map right here, another ancient map, you can see they placed Magog right up here as well. Okay, however, in this map, the location of Gomer and Togarma is also slightly skewed, slightly different. Okay, but for our purpose, as we mentioned, identifying who or where Gog is, this should suffice. So the Lord is telling Ezekiel to prophesy against Gog, right? The land of Magog, and say what exactly? Say the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. Now, mind you, because this chapter is prophetic, this Gog here, because you may say, well, but Magog was a son of Japheth. However, this isn't talking about the actual original, people of that land. Okay, it's talking about the modern day inhabitants of that land, which is dealing with Russia. Okay, so verse 3 says here, and say, Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. And I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth and all thine army, horses and horsemen. Now, in order to get a good understanding of this, you got to look into a bit of the history of Russia, what they were like, but mainly like not too like distant history. You can look into that if you want, but more recent history should suffice, which is how they were prior to becoming known as Russia, how they were as the Soviet Union, what things were like during the Cold War, like those kinds of times, it would make sense, because why is the Lord saying here that he is going to turn them back, okay, and put hooks into their jaws? Turning them back, meaning that he's going to take them from the state that they're in, at least, I can't even say now per se, because now they're being turned back, but how they were, a couple of years ago, where they were sort of like that hibernating bear. Prior to a lot of these treaties and agreements of peace between Russia and the West being nullified, they were of the mindset of being in a defensive position, but not trying to start conflict and trying to avoid it at all costs. However, the Lord said he's going to turn them back from that state, from that mindset, back into the mindset that they were in as the Soviet Union, of being ready to go to war, okay, of being flared and fired back up. And how did the Lord do that? Well, you had one example, which is the whole Ukraine situation, okay, and pretty much by the Lord using the kings or the heads of these other nations to provoke Russia, he was able to turn them back into a warlike spirit, to where now they're saying, look, we're doing what we're doing over there in Ukraine, but if you make one wrong move, nuclear war is on the horizon, and we're not afraid to engage in that kind of war. And that's what the Lord wants, because that is a step in fulfilling prophecy. You can't have World War III, a nuclear war, without one of the major key players in that war, which is Russia. So continuing to read on, and put hooks into thy jaws, similar to how you get a fish, right? When you put the fishing hook into the water, you put the bait on the hook. When the fish grabs it, it basically grabs it and tries to swim away with it. But the job of the hook is to basically hook the fish, and that way you can turn it back, you can reel it back towards you in the way you want it to go. So that's the analogy that's being used here. And I will bring thee forth and all thine army, horses and horsemen. And when it talks about horses and horsemen, it's not literal, all right, because in this time, when they go to war, they're not really using horses and horsemen, but the modern day representation would be their military and their military weapons and equipment, tanks, in this case, helicopters and you know, different fighter jets and bombers and all of those things. Okay, that played like a similar usefulness as how the horses were back then, because horses in the ancient world were crucial to war. So it says, "And all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords." So they're all going to have their weapons, which when you look at the kind of technology Russia's dealing with, it's you know, it's some pretty damaging and dangerous technology. Okay, they have a very strong and vast military. So the Lord is saying he's gonna put that spirit on them, and they're gonna come prepared for war with their armies. But not only them, all right, because then it goes on to list some other nations here that are gonna come along with Russia. And here you have Persia, which we know is modern day Iran. You have Ethiopia, which we all know where that is, and Libya with them. With who? With Russia. All of them with shield and helmet. Why are they going to have shield and helmet? Because they're also going to be prepared for war. Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarma of the north quarters, and all his bands. And they're referred to as the north quarters because when you pull up a map, maybe you pull up a map like this, you can see from Israel, right? Generally speaking, these locations, these regions, even Meshech, Tubal, Togarma, and Gomer, these are all north. Okay, so like I said, the maps will slightly vary from the locations they place these, but you know, on a general sense, they sort of place it in a similar area. So you know, these nations like you see here, like we looked at Armenia, we looked at Azerbaijan, we looked at Turkey, okay, and all these sort of neighboring nations, Iran, okay, some of these African nations, they're all going to come, as it says here, and all his bands, the word bands meaning armies or soldiers or troops, okay, and many people with thee. So you're going to have Russia and their armies along with these nations right here and their armies are all going to be coming along with Russia. So that tells us that regardless of the state of the world today, when this war does pop off to where this prophecy is being fulfilled, these nations are going to be on the side of Russia. Verse 7, "Be thou prepared, and prepare for thyself." Speaking of Russia, right? "Thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou" what? "A guard unto them." If you're a guard unto them, that means that they are allied with you. But why is Gog or Russia here being told to be a guard unto them? That is because Russia would be considered the greatest superpower of these nations that are mentioned here. Verse 8, "After many days thou shalt be visited, in the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword." So meaning that when it says thou shalt be visited, when you actually look into that word over there, it basically means to be called up, you know, or appointed to do a certain task, right? So the word here is pakad or paquad, but it says to attend to, muster, reckon, right? To, let's see, to appoint, to assign, to lay upon as charge, to be sought, to be needed. So in the latter years, or as it says here, after many days thou shalt be visited, because at the time Ezekiel was prophesying this, that's not when this prophecy was going to be fulfilled. It wasn't going to be until a long period of time later that these people, you know, Russia would be appointed to play this role. In the latter years, which is in these times, right, the end days, thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and the land and is gathered out of many people. Now the land that is referring to here is the land of Israel, and it goes on to tell you that, right, against the mountains of Israel. Okay, now why is it referred to as the land that is brought back from the sword? You know, simply because when you look at the course of history, that land has, you know, gone through many different wars, at times been decimated and desolated and then built back up. Okay. And as it says, and is gathered out of many people, which that the wording is just, it could be tricky based on how it's worded here. But when you read it in other translations, you get the sense it's pretty much saying that the inhabitants, okay, are a gathering of many different people. Now, when you look at the land today, you'll see that a part of the population are, Amalekites, and then a part of them are Palestinians, or Arabs, which the word Arab goes back to the Hebrew word Arab, which means mixture. Because to call somebody an Arab, it's not necessarily a nationality. It's a mixture of different nations. Okay. So where we at? It says here, against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste, right? And once again, going back to that point, being often destroyed or having gone through that war, that destruction of war, and then being built back up. But is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. How are they dwelling safely? Now, when you look at how it is that these people, like the modern day inhabitants, as the scriptures say, a bastard shall dwell in Ashdod. When you look at how it is that they're able to dwell safely, well, you have to go back and look at how they got that land in the first place, right? And I pulled up here the Balfour Declaration, which you can take a look at it. But this was set up, by supporting nations, okay, which basically ensured safety and security for these inhabitants of the land. And even till today, they get that special treatment, and that safety to where people are hesitant to even speak against them. All right. And you can see it all today. Now, I'm going to read a certain portion of this here to sort of drive that point a bit more. And this is, once again, from the Balfour Declaration. And it says here, the declaration called for safeguarding the civil and religious rights for the Palestinian Arabs, who composed the vast majority of the local population, and also the rights and political status of the Jewish communities in other countries outside of Palestine. And then it goes on more and more, but this is mainly the part that I wanted to bring out here. So you can read more about this if you want to, but because of the, support, okay, which even included the Rothschilds, because of that support, they have been safeguarded in that land. But that's going to come to an end when the Lord brings, these prophecies to come to pass. Verse 9, thou shalt ascend and come like a storm, talking to Russia. Now, why does it say that they're going to ascend? Because when you look at a map here, you would say, well, if Russia's up here, and Israel is down here, why does it say that they're going to ascend to come against Israel? And the reason is because it's not referring to, their traversal over here in the way you're looking at this map. But actually, if you were standing here, in real life, and you were to come towards here, the closer you got up to Israel, the higher you would have to go, because Israel is a hill country, so in terms of altitude, it's higher than, the regions around it. So you actually have to ascend to come up here. Okay, so going back to Ezekiel 38, the point here is Russia is going to come to that area, to that land. As it says, like a storm, thou shalt be like a cloud to cover the land, thou and all thy bands, and and many people with thee. And this is a metaphorical way of emphasizing or putting emphasis on the, the size of their army that they're going to bring. That's why it likens them onto a cloud that's covering the whole land, or a storm. Verse 10, thus saith the Lord Yahweh, it shall also come to pass that at the same time shall things come into thy mind, and thou shalt think an evil thought. So at this time, what time is this going to be? This is going to be when, in the time of World War III. There's no way Russia is gonna have Turkey and all these different Iran and all these nations along with it, with their armies coming down to invade the land of Israel, and you're not in World War III. So at this time, as all this is going on, they're also going to think, as they're coming against Israel, as it says here, they're going to think an evil thought, which is, and thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. The land of unwalled villages is referring to America. Okay. Now, I'm sure I don't need to explain why it's considered the land of unwalled villages, because in the modern day, the walls of a village or of a country would be its borders. And today, you can even see a perfect example as to why it would be referred to as a land of unwalled villages, as you've had over 7 million people come up into the country through their unsecured borders, carefree, coming in and leaving. Okay. And why are they going to come against the U.S.? Well, you can see what's happening today, right? The U.S. is sort of just like, tied at the hip with Israel. So if Israel is involved in something, the U.S. is going to be involved in it as well. And that means if Russia is coming against Israel, Russia is going to be coming against the U.S. as well. So it says here, I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, which highlights the attitude of the, American people, which is, a lack of sense of urgency or security because of their false sense of security, right? So they think that, we'll be good, or this can never happen over here. So they're in that mindset, okay, of being at rest. All of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. Now, the main way that Russia is going to do this is by, in that war, using their nuclear capability to attack this place. However, it's very possible as well that they can do this they can also do damage from the inside. Okay, because right now, if you're a country that sees the potential, like you're like, yo, it looks like we can potentially end up at, in a conflict with this nation right here, and their borders are open. Who wouldn't think to send, their personnel into that country to invade that country and position themselves to be in a place that can be used when needed, right? So, it's very possible that with the unsecured border, that not just Russia, but other countries as well that are adversaries to this place could send, troops or, for lack of a better word, plainclothes informants into the country to be in a position to where it can be advantageous for that nation if they end up having to go to war. Verse 12, to take a spoil and to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited. So now it's just jumping back, talking about Israel. And upon the people that are gathered out of the nations, which have gotten cattle and goods that dwell in the midst of the land. And similar to, like we read, similar to verse 8, okay, it's being re-emphasized here in verse 12 to say that Russia is going to come to take a spoil and to take a prey, which happens when you go to war and you win. All right, you take over a nation or a people, you take the goods of that people as a spoil or a prey. Okay, and it's referred to as the desolate places that are now inhabited, another way of saying the land that is brought back from the sword. Okay, once again, with the people that are gathered out of the nations. Now, when it says they have gotten cattle and goods, is a representation of the benefits, and resources that they've been given, okay, to dwell in that land. And you can look that up and find out the exact details of it, but they're taken care of. Verse 13, Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish, which when you look it up, they position Sheba and Dedan as, and it's quite suitable that they're mentioned as merchants, but they're basically positioned on the peninsula of Saudi Arabia. Okay, so, and we know Tarshish to be Spain. Okay, but the point, as we're going to read here, is, as it says, Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish, with all the young lions thereof, shall say unto thee, art thou come to take a spoil? Now, when it says young lions, it's just referring to the people. Okay, lions don't speak. That's number one. And when you read in the book of Micah, it likens the tribe of Judah onto a young lion, okay, amongst the sheep. So it's just still referring to the people. But as it says here, they shall say unto thee, art thou come to take a spoil? Hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey? To gather away, or to carry away silver and gold? To take away cattle and goods? To take a great spoil? And what this is this is rhetorical, but it's worded in this way to emphasize the sheer power and size of the army that Russia is going to come with. And I'll give you an example to sort of make this make sense. It's like if somebody came into the store, right? You own a shop or something like that, right? Or a mall, and somebody comes up in there and they come with carts of stacks of money and gold and all of these things, and they're just going around, they're saying, give me this, give me this, give me this. And it's like if people are looking at the person like, damn, you're gonna buy the whole mall, right? And that's to say, that's to emphasize, this guy has so much money, it looks like he's gonna buy the whole mall. So that's sort of what these nations are saying here. Damn, you came with this whole army, you finna, you take a great spoil, you look like you finna take over this whole thing. Verse 14, therefore, son of man, prophesy and say unto Gog, thus saith the Lord Yahweh, in that day when my people of Israel dwelleth safely, shalt thou not know it? Which now, as we go into the next few verses, when it refers, as it says here, my people of Israel, don't get thrown off by that, because as we read in subsequent verses, you'll see it's really referring to the inhabitants of the land of Israel. Okay, not collectively as the nation of Israel here, but more so the inhabitants of that land. Although right now you do have actual Israelites that are in the land of Israel, but you also have Amalekites and different heathens that are in there as well. Okay, so here it's really referring to the people that are dwelling in that land. So as it says, in that day when my people of Israel dwell safely, shalt thou not know it, right? So wouldn't you know what was going on in that, know their state at this point in time? Of course they would, because they're the ones that are going to come against them. Right, verse 15, it says, and thou shalt come from thy place out of the north parts, thou and many people with thee, which we read about those people in the verses above, all of them riding upon horses, a great company and a mighty army. Metaphorically, to say that they're going to come with, their troops and their different equipment, along with Russia to come against that land. Verse 16, and thou shalt come up against my people of Israel as a cloud to cover the land. See, so we know that right now, the collectively, the nation of Israel is not in that land. You do have remnants, of Israelites that are there, but we're scattered in the four corners of the earth. So it's not talking about, when it says my people of Israel, the nation collectively, but rather that the land and the people that are in there right now. As it says, as a cloud to cover the land, it shall be in the latter days. So we know this is a prophecy. This wasn't something that happened during Ezekiel's time, because Ezekiel wasn't living in the latter days, but we are. And I will bring thee against my land, that the heathen may know me, when I shall be sanctified in thee, O Gog, before their eyes. Right. So as the scriptures say, the Lord is known by the judgment which he executeth. So by using Gog to bring this level of destruction, the Lord's name is going to be renowned in the earth again. The world is going to fear him, just like it did after he brought the destruction upon Egypt. Verse 17, thus saith the Lord Yahweh, art thou he of whom I have spoken in old time by my servants the prophets of Israel, which prophesied in those days many years that I would bring thee against them? Right, and in our time, right, what's one example? Ezekiel, right? Because the prophets of old, various prophets, not every single one of them had, do we have access to their writings now? But as stated in this verse, the Lord put the Spirit on them to prophesy during their times, respectively. One example being Ezekiel, that he would bring, Gog against that land of Israel. Okay. Verse 18, and it shall come to pass at the same time when Gog shall come against the land of Israel, saith the Lord Yahweh, that my fury shall come up in my face. So as this is happening in the midst of that war, the Lord is going to be, he's going to be fired up. He's going to be, inflamed with that anger. Because remember, the scriptures say this is going to be the day of the Lord's wrath. For in my jealousy and in my fire, or in the fire of my wrath, have I spoken. Surely in that day there shall be a great shaking in the land of Israel. And what's going to cause that shaking? That destruction. When you have these nations up in there, and there's missiles flying and buildings are being broken down. I mean, just go watch like a video of war and you'll understand. Verse 20, so that the fishes of the sea and the fowls of the heaven and the beasts of the field and all creeping things that creep upon the earth and all the men that are upon the face of the earth shall shake at my presence. Right, because it's known as what? The day of the Lord, or really of his vengeance. And the mountains shall be thrown down, and the steep places shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground. And why is that going to be? Once again, because of the destruction of that war. And I will call for a sword against him throughout all my mountains, saith the Lord Yahweh. Every man's sword shall be against his brother. So now, keep in mind that though the Lord is going to use, he's going to use Russia to do this, to accomplish this task, he is still going to bring judgment upon them as well. As it says, he will call for a sword against him, referring to God. Okay. And as it says, every man's sword shall be against his brother. So at some point, they're going to start fighting amongst themselves. Verse 22, and I will plead against him. Now, when it says plead, it doesn't mean, like plead for mercy, like beg. But the word here means to judge. Okay. You can see the word here in the Hebrews, shapat, which means, as it says here, to judge, to vindicate, to punish, or to execute judgment. So when the Lord says he's going to plead against him, meaning he's going to bring judgment upon them with pestilence and with blood, and I will rain upon him and upon his bands, his armies, and upon the many people that are with him, an overflowing rain and great hailstones, fire and brimstone. So that's going to be what? The missiles and also the lasers from the chariots, because at this point, Yahweh Shai and the angels are also going to make their appearance, during this time of World War III. And the precept here is also Revelation, the 20th chapter, which right around the 8th, 9th, 10th verse, around there, it talks about the Lord, bringing fire from heaven upon Gog. Verse 23, thus will I magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am the Lord Yahweh. So basically, the Lord is going to, in a nutshell of a recap, the Lord is going to bring Russia and these nations against Israel and the U.S., and he's going to use them to bring destruction upon that land, and then he's going to bring destruction upon them. So when it's all said and done, the whole world is going to know that this is the workings of Yahweh Ba'asham Yahweh Shai, and they're going to fear. And that's pretty much the end of Ezekiel, the 38th chapter. So with that, I'm going to end it here. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Ba'asham Yahweh Shai Ba'asham Rachak Wadash. And until next time, Shalom.